Thanks, Andre. Really, Andre. Sorry.
Thanks,
Scott.
You can call me Andre. I like to
compliment. I promise. I promise.
Yeah.
No, I'm Andre part 2.
Thank you, Scott and Andre and Chris. All really interesting presentations. Great to look at this, with new eyes. We're all reimagining public transit. Not that we don't reimagine shared mobility and mobility in general constantly, but COVID has obviously put a whole new spin on this ecosystem, and appreciate your perspectives on that and some time to discuss, what technology can do to help us maneuver through this. So we are open for questions.
And we've got, Jean, we've got one hand up, Ron Bano.
Okay.
So Ron, did you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Sure. I actually did have a question for each of the 3 speakers, but I'll just start off with the first one with Chris. Chris, could you tell us a couple of the largest systems that you work with and also a couple of the smallest systems that you are working with?
Yeah, thank you. So again, it depends. Our business is pretty complex in terms of we have a consumer side of our business in which we have a partnership model in which we do some data sharing and basically give them some of the tools that are available within the consumer application. So we support, organizations in the U.S. as small as, 5, 10 routes. I'd be happy to share a full list of coverage. We actually have it all available on our website. And in terms of like the white label market, some of our largest customers include, currently we're doing a project in Ile-de-France right now. So actually we're supporting that region right now. And then we're also doing some other interesting projects that are actually around more business park focus. So trying to get those essential workers to work, so on and so forth. So really the range is anywhere as small as, a few routes, all the way, upwards to, the largest regions, across the world. But again, the consumer model, is a bit different than our white label model where the organizations actually own all the data and, communications with users.
Thank you.
Great. Any more questions that folks have for the speakers?
Sorry, Ron, if you had a couple more questions, if you wanted to go ahead and ask those. Oops, you're muted.
Yep.
Thank you. Gotcha. Just one more question of Scott. You were presenting about different activities, of course, the public organizations that you've been working with, but do you have any collaboration with the highway agencies at all in terms of your work that you've been doing?
This is a question for me, for Scott?
For Scott, uh-huh.
Yeah, so our collaborations in the public sector are across probably 3 different levels. And I'll speak more, I apologize, but it's going to be more from the European angle here. So it's going to be regional transportation agencies, RTAs. It's going to be PTAs, public transportation agencies, local operators. And it's going to be either national agencies for public transit, or it's going to be national rail operators such as Renfe in Spain, NS in Netherlands, etc. So I would say it's probably at the local, the regional, and the national level. And those are in line with either operations, they are with planning, and they are with kind of multimodal journeys, I would say. Those are really the 3 clients that we target for our solution. For example, just to kind of elaborate on this, our recent deployment and project in southern Sweden, in Malmö, with Skåne Trafiken. They're the regional transport authority. Carol, I know you know about this project too. And we call it Open Maps for Public Transit. And this is a partnership with the regional transport agency in southern Sweden, the Skåne region, as well as adjacent agencies in Copenhagen, and then the 5 to 6 municipalities between Copenhagen and southern Sweden. So that's Malmo, Lund, and Helsingborg. So I give you this example because it's a mix of different agencies that we collaborate with and build that open mobility marketplace by essentially assembling our SDK, which is going to be eventually licensed to the client, which is going to be the RTA, Skåne Trafiken, and they are going to be the operator of this marketplace. And our SDK is going to be integrated into their existing legacy application, their app. So we're not building a new white label for them. They already have theirs. But what we're doing is we're integrating the MSPs. We're including our journey planning. We're including our intermodal router algorithms. And we're assembling these building blocks as a middleware so that they can basically have the flexibility, this middle path. This is the opposite of a monopolization of mass. So that's a very negative trend we've seen in many years in the marketplaces. We're trying to give the flexibility so that whatever partner or whatever agency wants to administer, orchestrate this, they have the flexibility to build out this plug and play. And not only that, they can attract other third-party private mass providers or developers to be able to utilize the SDK to build their own consumer-facing business-to-consumer applications. Our business is not building apps or working directly with the consumer. We work with enterprise agencies to help them empower, and then they open out that ecosystem. This has been one of the primary charters of Mass Alliance, of Ertico ITS, as well as many different multinational agencies. And we feel that this project in Sweden is very cutting edge because we're taking this open mobility marketplace to the next level.
I know the question was not directed at me, but Ron, I thought I would just mention, because it was not part of my presentation at all, that we are also working with some highway authorities on congestion management technology and mobility as a service as well, with most active work in Israel with the Ministry of Transportation there. But there are a number of federal highway programs in the US that we are following and interested in and have applied with partners as well. So I thought I would just quickly mention that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful because we don't want to leave the highway agencies out of the picture. And some of them are really beginning to ask, how can we get involved in some of the things that public transport is doing?
Especially not in the US, based on how federal highways is funded compared to federal transit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just to add a little bit to that whole idea, for those of you in the US, AASHTO is forming a new committee to look at work zone innovation, and they've specifically included public transit in that discussion. And as part of that task force, actually, a couple of my staff members will be representing public transit on the AASHTO work zone committee. So along those same lines, that we need to get everybody in this discussion, be thinking about innovation, be thinking about how all the different factors fit into it, and how do we use technology to improve that. So I think this is really timely. Okay, I see we have a couple hands raised, and I've lost who the first one was.
The first one was Victorious.
Yeah, that's
great.
Okay,
perfect. That's I have a question. Well, first of all, come from Transamo Consultancy from a Transit Group, so operating public transportation solutions around the world. I have a question for Scott. Basically, what would be the timeline of the H2020 proposal? Like, what do you cover in your solution right now, and what would be the scope or the ambition you wish to give to it?
Right. Yes. So part of it is integrated with our core offer, which is part of our short-term pilot initiative. But the project is basically laid out across a 2.5 to 3 year time span. We're in the early phases of scoping and development right now, but it's basically broken out into about 4 different phases. And the first phase is basically proving out and developing amongst a small user group in multiple cities to test out the viability of the core features related to social distancing, filtering, station capacity, as well as linkages to available mobility providers that fit the parameters related to the public health indicators that have been set forth by the technical and functional requirements.
And I guess we have another hand up, and then Susan is after that. So I'm having trouble seeing.
Looks like Edward, Mark Edward.
Yes.
It's Edward Mark, New York State
Okay.
Department of Transportation. I came late, so I'm sorry. Late to the great meeting. Question to Scott. You refer to basically you're almost like setting up a standard. You refer to level 4, and you're talking to the hub registry. And I might have missed it when you talked about in the beginning of it. I was pulled away for a quick call, a conference call came in. Can you go over that again? What you were referring to in terms of level 4, in terms of that, the whole construct of the registry? Because it seems to me it goes beyond your effort in terms of that you're involved with it at iomob. And then the last thing, part 2, is what pilots are you involved with in America, in North America? Okay.
Yeah, got it. So level 4 is basically part of our core offer for our micromobility bundle. So essentially, when we integrate with mobility providers, it includes the 4 different phases of discovery, registration, booking, and payments. So we try to avoid as much as possible any of the deep linking that prevents consumers to have that full experience, whether certainly not within an iomob app, but in an iomob powered app through our SDK. So that is really one of our value propositions, is offering that level of complete integration such that improves the experience and the journey for consumers, because we feel that that's a huge barrier to entry in the mass marketplace. Deep linking just does not cut it in our experience. So we really try to pursue that as much as possible and demonstrate that through our projects. Pilots in North America, our primary pilot is with the city of Pittsburgh in the City of Tomorrow Challenge with Ford Motor Company in developing a mobility as a service pilot and scheme, and providing consulting and white paper leadership to the City of Pittsburgh Mobility Division for basically integrating their new vision of tomorrow for mobility as a service, and essentially deep linking service related to the Port Authority of Allegheny County and other local mobility service providers within the city and region. So that's primarily our North American footprint. I don't want to misrepresent ourselves, but we are pretty much heavily Eurocentric at this point, but we're certainly very open to discovering collaboration and partnerships with local city and regional agencies across North America.
Great. And I think we had Susan wanted to ask a question.
Yeah. Hi.
Susan.
Thanks for your talks, guys. So we've got Andre, Chris, and Scott. So, so my question for you is more, future looking. So, transit's in crisis. We've got to rebuild trust in using shared mobility and using public transit. So as we look to the future, how do we transition and keep everybody going, keep the transit industry going, and what types of technologies and approaches might we be using?
It's really hard to get into this, I found.
Did you guys hear me? I think we've got.
Yes, we heard you, and I just muted the person who.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you came through loud and clear, Susan.
Okay, cool. I was looking at Andre and I was just like, is he, can you tell what I'm saying? Yeah, so I'm just, what are you guys thinking about the future? Like, how do we see ourselves out of this, say, in 5 years? And what are the major innovations that are going to see us through? Get us through this, right? Get us over these trust barriers, get us over the financial crisis. Hopefully you're thinking about this.
Yeah, I don't know, Gene, do you want to do this in the order that we presented, or how you want to do it?
I'm just going to defer to the other speakers. I've taken up too much time, so let the other guys talk.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
and
Chris, if you want to go ahead.
I'll take it back. Yeah. So, yeah, certainly. I mean, we're a very data-driven company on our end. So, like, one thing we've been trying to do, I can tell you, working with organizations, is continuing to look at what the data is telling us. So, the way we look at, mobility now, and the way we're going to look at it, like you said, in 5 years now, it's going to change. And I think the market is going to be one of those things that tell us as these micromobility pilots and all these things continue to take on. But again, it's also, one thing that we haven't addressed today. It's also the, a lot of the things regarding the financials and the incentive-based mode choices is another thing that needs to be considered as well. So I think a lot of things in terms of the way that transit is funded, the way that they can incent, different mode choices and make that, hopefully shift behaviors as we look at things here is another thing that's hugely important. So I can tell you we've done a couple of very interesting studies recently around certain, just very small corridors where, we've looked at, hey, how are people getting here today, and what kind of suggestions can we make in terms of mode choice? So hopefully that was helpful, but there's a lot of moving pieces there for sure in that question.
Yeah, it's a great question, Susan. Definitely something we've been I've been thinking about. We've been talking internally about, talking to a bunch of our partners about. I think I touched on this a little bit at the end of my talk, and kind of like the three buckets that I've been thinking about, sort of how do we use technology to make existing, in particular, bus service safer through, and I do think there's some things we could do with capacity planning and sort of shifting over to a system where you're potentially even booking seats in advance on buses to ensure social distancing that would sort of provide people with the confidence that they're not going to get on overly crowded modes. But it's going to be hard, right, until we have a vaccine. Like, there's no question it's going to be a huge challenge. And then I think I think big picture, we just need to invest way more in public transit. I'm saying this is I'm obviously preaching to the choir when I say that on this call. But when you think about sort of how critical getting people out of private vehicles and onto shared modes such as public transit is to two issues that are major public policy topics at the moment, both greenhouse gas emissions and improving equity. And I think it's great that we're seeing sort of a lot more attention recently on sort of the discriminatory ways that our transportation system has been built, right? This is not some random accident that we have congestion and that we have poor transportation options for folks of certain incomes and certain races. It's part of our history, and we need to face that. So I think we need to invest just dramatically more into public transit. And we need to do a better job as a community as talking about how the nexus between that and greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gas emissions is not just about using electric vehicles, right? There's this other major component, which is, and I think we all know that, but I don't think your average state official, your average member of Congress is necessarily thinking about it that way, if I'm being totally honest. And then, and also on the equity front, sort of the dramatic impact it could have on access to jobs and healthcare and education. And then I think we also, at the same time, we just need to be smarter about how we're using public transit money, and just be much smarter about how we're planning. Let's double down on fixed route bus services that make sense, right? The places where it's dense and where they are full, let's double down and make it even more frequent, even more efficient, even better in those places. And let's use more flexible options elsewhere where it makes sense. So I think it's going to be a huge challenge based on the financial straits that transit agencies and cities are in right now, and that they're going to be in with declining, sales and other tax revenue. But it's also an opportunity, right? If we're sort of in a position where we're kind of forced to be thinking about how can we do these things more efficiently, it might be an opportunity to think a little bit bigger in terms of how we design these networks and sort of get outside of the, sometimes unhelpful local politics that make it hard to redesign a bus network in a more effective way.
Yeah, Andre, I think you and I've had this conversation before, right? Like very beginning of COVID, right? That this is this huge crisis moment, this huge opportunity for us to kind of rethink things, bring on micromobility where it makes sense. But it's just so hard to think about how we're going to do that with our current finance structure and mechanisms. And I hear you, and I love your positive attitude, but I just feel like, we're not necessarily making the progress we need to make in terms of scaling, right? We've had these pilots, which are fabulous, and but how do we get to scale, right? In this crisis moment, and I'm not sure I see a way through, and that's why I'm asking you guys these tough questions. I know some of the questions I'm asking you probably fall into like the proprietary space of, I'm not going to tell you that we're developing flying robots or something, but the issue of finance, I think, is pretty serious.
I don't disagree with any of that. So although I don't like your dark outlook, Susan, I feel like it's not consistent with your personality. It's disturbing me on this call.
Well, it's just that the across the nation, transit is in a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
and the numbers from a financial perspective, and I know, Andre, from your background, this, right? Is I guess, like, what do we do?
Yeah, so I think here's a couple of things. Like, I think there are some encouraging signs. And sorry, I'll stop. I think one thing that was interesting about the CARES Act was that it provided transit agencies with total flexibility on how they use the money, right? Instead of forcing them to use it on capital expenditures. So I think, now it's still been a challenge to the natural thing to do there is just to put it towards your core services and kind of filling gaps in finances that have been created. But some places have started to use that to bring on flexible services, which is interesting, and I think important. I think that bill that passed in the House, which has, in my mind, like virtually no chance of becoming law before the presidential election, but does significantly increase funding for public transit, and also, although I disagree with several components of it, like in very important ways, like moves towards like more outcome-based goals of gas emissions and like doing connectivity, and like we will see what happens in November, but I don't think it's any secret that Biden is a big fan of public transit and cares about the climate and cares a lot about equity. And so I do think that and even if Trump is reelected and he's talking about infrastructure, I do think there's going to be an opportunity post-November for, at least at the federal level, a pretty substantial new influx of funding into public transit and addressing some of these issues. Does it get at everything? Like, no, we still are going to have like huge challenges, but I do think it's those are my like glimmers of optimism to provide to you.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. I mean, I'm pretty excited about the idea of another stimulus, but I think it needs to build in even more flexible funding opportunities than just shoring up the gaps, because if we keep doing that, game over, right? I think the big moment and the big opportunity here for companies like all of yours is this flexibility.
Okay, thanks. Interesting conversation, very timely. But I do want to move on.